In this final lesson on how to use the color fidget, we're going to take you through 3 practical examples. First, I'm going to paint this painting and show you my thought process for using the color fidget to come up with a limited palette. Secondly, we'll use it to brainstorm a cohesive brand palette. Traditionally, when artists choose to work with a limited palette, they're choosing to work with specific paints that might limit the chroma or the range of hues that you can get. For example, the Zorn palette uses only a vibrant red, a sometimes vibrant, sometimes muted yellow, and black. So there's no real vibrant greens or blues or purples in that palette. But you don't have to do a limited palette just based on what paints are available and how paints behave when they mix. Using the color fidget, you can actually think a little bit more abstractly. You can choose to anchor your palette on actual color, hues, and characters, regardless of what paints you had to mix to get there. In other words, rather than thinking, I'll anchor my warm colors on cadmium red, or I'll choose iron oxide red. Instead of choosing pigments, you might say, well, what I want is a vivid red, or I want a muted red-violet. Right? So if you're choosing the character and the hue, and then finding the paint or the paint mixture that can get you there, you actually have a lot more flexibility in your thinking. Of course, as a painter, you're kind of limited to what colors you can get in paint, but that's okay. Working within those limitations is still part of the fun and the challenge. All right, so let's say I want to take this photograph of my daughter standing on a tree stump at the park and turn it into a painting that I feel is sort of cohesive in its use of color. That means a lot of the stuff we've talked about in the previous videos will be at work here. So the colors are going to play roles. They're going to help structure the piece and direct the eye. That's the goal anyway. What I want is I want to anchor the palette on the vibrant pink or magenta of her jacket. If I use my color fidget, there's a few different ways I could arrange it that shows a vibrant magenta. If I arrange it like this, I get vibrant rose red, magenta, fuchsia, purple, and then I also get vibrant yellows, oranges, and lime green on the other side. But there aren't a lot of vibrant yellows and limes or purples in the photo that I'm working with, so this doesn't really make sense to me. So I always want to kind of be thoughtful about my color choices and use this as a brainstorming tool. And so I might explore a bunch of different configurations and land on this. In this configuration, I only have one vivid hue, that magenta. I've got a couple options for muted or mid-chroma hues, and then I've got a range of options for grayish colors. So follow along with me as I paint, and I'll put a little graphic of how I'm choosing colors from this configuration of the color fidget as I go. I'm going to start by laying in an underpainting in a grayish range of oranges. So on my color fidget, I can kind of lean a little bit toward yellow and a little bit toward red, as long as I stay grayish, right? And so that's kind of what I'm doing as I go around the ground and modulate the hue slightly, but I'm keeping it very dull, and I'm actually mixing in a neutral gray paint that I have with my set of acrylics here. So once that underpainting is done, now I'm going to lay in some grayish blue violets, which I grabbed from over here on the color fidget. I'm going to vary the value of these background cars, but I'm actually going to keep that variation of lightness a little more limited. In other words, I'm going to lower the contrast to keep those in the background and not coming forward as something to grab the eye. So not only am I using value, but I'm also using character. I'm using the limited chroma of these blue violets to help those cars to play the role of background objects, right? I noticed that they were leaning a little too blue, and that, a muted blue was covered by the masks on the color fidget in this configuration. So I ended up going back over that background area with a wash of quinacridone purple, just to kind of nudge the hue back over to blue-violet. All right, so in the next step, I wanted to introduce some of the vegetation in the background, but again, I didn't want the chroma to be too high, and I can see on my Color Fidget that I do have sort of like medium chroma limes available. I don't have vibrant greens or even medium chroma greens, but as long as I'm leaning lime, I can do that in the background here. So I'm introducing this lime for the grass and some of the trees in the background. Now I'm looking at these two elements of the composition that are playing a more like supporting role. So I'm going to use mid-chroma colors for those areas. For the dumpster, in the picture, it is kind of like a deep green, but I'm going to try to nudge it a little bit on the side that's facing the light toward lime, since I have a mid-chroma lime available to me. And then I'm going to keep the side facing us that's in the shadow as a much more dark and therefore lower chroma cyan type color, including this graffiti on the side, which is lighter but still sort of mid-chroma. So I think those are all falling within my allowed colors. And of course, it's just a guide to sort of help you structure it. And if it's not perfect, it's not perfect. Some people have written in comments asking like, can I get the hex codes for the colors on the Color Fidget? And that's kind of missing the point. It's not for matching specific colors. It's for thinking about how limiting the chroma of different hues is really the key to making things work together and play specific roles. So the exact shade or the exact amount of saturation isn't the point. All right, so now I'm going to work on the stump a little bit. I've got some mid-chroma, like primrose yellows that I could pull from and oranges. So I'm going to try to do the stump in like a variety of different light, medium, dark oranges that are all sort of mid-chroma. And now finally, I'm going to work on the focal point, the little girl here. Her socks, her pants, her shoes, her shirt, these are all going to be sort of like mid to low chroma colors from all around the wheel. So I can grab indigo, cyan, lime, orange, pink, fuchsia, as long as I keep the chroma really low or middling on a couple of them, right? And then finally, the jacket, I'm going to put in the most vivid magenta I can with the set of acrylic paints I'm working with. And that is going to behave as the focal point. So here's the finished painting. I made a couple tweaks after the time-lapse recording. And, it's not perfect, but I think what is happening here is the chroma is really helping to distinguish the foreground from the background. We end up with about as much visual information in the background, but because the contrast is lowered and the chroma is lowered, it doesn't compete too much visually with the part that you're supposed to focus on. So that's painting with the Color Fidget. Now I'm going to boot up Adobe Illustrator and make a brand palette for an imaginary brand. Let's go. On this website, Good Brief, you can just kind of hit this generate button. I left it on random and it gave me, I guess, the food industry. It said, we're a big chain of stores that sells baked goods. Our main product stands out because of its superior quality and authenticity. Our target audience is parents. We want to convey a sense of comfort while at the same time being down to earth. So that's great. I mean, that gives me some keywords. We've got authenticity, comfort, down to earth. I'm thinking that this is leaning us in a very specific direction in terms of the character of my color palette. If I think about authenticity, a lot of times that is leading me toward lower chroma colors, colors that are more muted, are more calm, feel more like stolid rather than exciting, right? Which is what a more high chroma color would tell me. I think what I might want to do is something like this. I'm actually going to ignore these like high-powered orange and amber and yellow type colors and focus my palette on these grayish colors. And there's a sort of blue-green peeking through here, a sort of lavender, and then a range of grayish blues. Gray at the center is, of course, an option too in this palette, so I shouldn't forget that. These colors are saying to me, especially this range of warmer colors, those ideas of comfort and authenticity. So how am I going to apply that to my mood board here as I'm developing this brand identity? I want you to follow along with me on the computer. I've got my little Color Fidget graphic down here, but I want to make something very clear. I'm not going to eyedropper it. I'm not going to grab colors from it and use those from my palette, because the colors on here are just supposed to represent for us hue and character so that we can start to make smart decisions about hue and character. I also want to open up the color guide in Illustrator just to kind of warn you of something. The color wheel that is native to Adobe Illustrator, if you're a graphic designer who works in this, you might know this, is kind of warped to fit the red, yellow, blue model. Kind of expanded the oranges and yellows a little bit so that red here and green are opposite each other, even though in computer graphics, red and cyan are opposite each other. So all that is just to say that the native color space for editing colors in Illustrator is a little warped because it's based on the artistic tradition of the red, yellow, blue wheel. So we're not going to use that. We're just going to use this good old-fashioned HSB slider box here. I'm going to first just pick my images and choose a hue that is in the oranges, since that's a big part of my available hue set here. But I'm going to lower the saturation significantly and keep it sort of grayish. I don't want to actually go anywhere above 40% saturation, just to keep things down to earth, right? And then I can say, well, maybe that color, if I just grab that hex code, is one of my key brand colors. Boom. And then keep going from there. So what if for some sort of secondary options within this palette, I can go as far as like almost a magenta and as far this way as almost like a lime, as long as I keep it really grayish. So what if I take this picture now and shift my hue over this direction, and take this picture and shift my hue over that direction, staying within this part of the circle? That's all feeling, you know, I've got a variety of hues, but they're feeling like they're from the same neighborhood. And then what if I take this element and give it an accent color, maybe a darker, sort of like a blue-green, right? So what if I just go over in here somewhere, hue, let's say 160. And again, I want to just keep my saturation low. I'll keep it down to like 40. And maybe my brightness down a little bit as well. Maybe I want to bring in another accent color like one of these. I'm going to try the lavender first. I'm going to pull this guy over this way and maybe tweak that hue a little bit more toward, well, I guess it's more of like a fuchsia or like royal purple hue, but again, lower my saturation and my brightness a little bit. I might actually go, you know what, I might go darker on that purple just to make sure I have a nice range of values in this palette as well. And I might take this element and give it the same hue, but make it lighter. And I've got a couple grays in here. And remember, gray is an option. Gray I could have in my palette if I want it. Let's take stock, though, of everything we've got in our palette so far, because I want to be intentional about it. I don't want to just like color pick like a madman and then call it a day. I want to judge my feeling of how cohesive this is or not. So I'm going to grab that. And I've already got a lot of colors here, right? I've already got 5 brand colors, which is a lot. Maybe I'll throw one more in since I've got these blues available. So this is like a cerulean-ish hue, so it's not quite cyan. Let's see if I like that. I kind of do, but it's feeling like too many hues, right? So what if I go back to this guy and maybe just darken him a little bit? It's feeling better. Is it saying the things I want it to say as a brand? Is it saying authentic, down to earth, and quality? The purple is feeling a little too out of the pale. So what if I switch these guys for something that's a little more in the cerulean zone? And then I'll do this one as well, like a 206. This is feeling a little more like where I want to be. Now my background is at 20% opacity. I'm just going to grab maybe this brown color and lower the opacity just to fade it out. It's helping it come together. Right now it does feel that the character is holding it together, right? That all of these low saturation colors are in the right neighborhood, but it's not feeling cohesive yet. And I'm feeling like that might be because I've strayed too far on some of these, right? And again, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm going to change this one 5 brand colors. I'm going to get rid of that. I don't want to go beyond 5. I'm going to keep it there. Make sure my lights and darks are telling the stories I want. Right? I'm thinking out loud as I go here and assessing whether this makes sense and communicates what it wants to communicate as a palette for a brand. And the hues I'm still a little bit bothered by. Maybe I need fewer accent colors. And I'm going to take those greens and I'm going to shift them all over toward my cerulean. So I'm at hue 160-ish. I'm going to make all of these that 206. And I immediately like it a lot better. I'm going to lower the brightness on this. And I'm going to maybe change the background to this warmer color. Go back to 20% opacity. There we are. I feel good about it. I might just tweak the hues a little bit. This yellowish one I could bring actually back over into the fold. So let me select all of the objects that are that color. I'm going to go to edit my colors, recolor artwork, edit. And what if I just bring it over this way? Do I want to keep it distinct from my other orange? Yes, absolutely. So what if I bring it up in brightness a little bit and see how that feels? Better. I'm sure you, if you played around, could do better, and I'd like to challenge you to try. But it's a color palette that, in my mind, communicates what it's supposed to. It is, by keeping things muted, speaking the right language for what this brand is supposed to be. And more than anything, one thing I hope that this demonstration has shown you is that one specific configuration of the Color Fidget actually contains a lot of possible ideas for different sets of colors that you could be putting together, right? It's not supposed to say, well, no, this is correct, or this is a good palette, and if you do something that is not shown on here, it's a bad palette. Really, it's just a color brainstorming tool. And in this case, with this brand palette, it helped me to arrive at a place where I knew I wanted to stick close to the center, in other words, low chroma colors, and I knew I wanted to choose an accent from the other side of the wheel that wasn't necessarily a complement. And it showed me what those options were, and I was able to make a decision that I finally was happy with. All right, so I had planned to do, as the final part of this video, a little segment on how might I use this to decorate a room as an interior designer, but this video is already getting really long, and I think I'll save that for another follow-up video. So stay tuned for that, and leave a comment below if these demonstrations have connected with you as an artist, if you have other questions as a designer, as a creator, as somebody who plays with color. And let's keep the conversation going.